Now we were on to this slide. Let's take it forward. How did Freud analyze the phases of a hysterical attack? So Freud divided a hysterical attack in 4 phases. The first phase was the epileptoid phase, the phase where one had fits and convulsions and epilepsy type of symptoms. The second phase was the phase of large movements of the body. The body was gyrating almost. And this is where, if you look at it from a neutral perspective, many times you can see the erotic movements disguised as hysterical movements. Third phase is the phase of hallucination, where the person experiences all sorts of hallucinations, or what today we would call as a psychotic phase. And the fourth is terminal phase, where there is a remission which begins and the person slowly comes to the normal state and the symptoms recede in intensity. Now, for Freud, the hallucinatory phase was very important, the third phase, because it was like a dream. It was a coded release of the core trauma. That whatever was the core trauma, it was getting enacted, right, in a coded language in the hallucinatory phase. Now, whatever events happen in the hallucinatory phase, in some way, they are associated to the original traumatic event. So the hallucinatory event became like a dream, which, if interpreted correctly, would yield information about the core early traumatic event. That the early traumatic event in a coded language was expressing itself. That the early traumatic event in a coded language was expressing itself through the hallucinatory phase. So the hallucinatory phase was okay. Okay, let me just repeat for those who are joined late. Freud divided the hysterical event in 4 phases. Right. The first, there is an echo. The first was the elliptoid phase, where epilepsy convulsion type movements took place, rather feelings took place. The patient experienced the epilepsy convulsion type events. Second was the phase of large movements of the body, the gyratory phase of the episode. Third was hallucinatory phase, in which the patients hallucinated something, almost a psychotic phase, and the terminal phase where symptoms receded into normalcy, and the normal state would again reappear. The hysterical episode will be over. Now, what was important for Freud was the third hallucinatory phase, because that was like a coded release of the core trauma, that the events which were occurring in the hallucinatory phase, what he was seeing, what he was speaking, was in some way expressing the core trauma in a coded language. So that was very important for Freud as raw material to interpret and slowly get to the roots. Now, in case of no hallucinatory phase, Freud would approach that kind of information through hypnosis. That if some people experienced hysterical episode without a hallucinatory phase, they would not give out raw material to interpret and go to the roots, then hypnosis can be a way of discovering the original trauma.
Sir, a question.
Please.
Was Freud using hypnosis regularly, frequently over a long period of time, or was it? I'm just curious.
He used it for a considerable period of time with Charcot and Brewer. Those were like his masters, his mentors in the initial years. So initially, he was like an apprentice to them, and they were very fond of hypnosis. So Freud also used hypnosis. Freud went on using hypnosis for quite some time, and that is where all these ideas of the hypnotic state, the hypnoid state, the trance-like states, they came up. What happened later was uh, two problems disturbed Freud. That is where he stopped using hypnosis. The first was every person could not be taken into the hypnotic trance, right? Because to get into a hypnotic trance, you have to be very trustful and you have to feel safe with the person who is hypnotizing you. Uh, I think I had shared this before that I always go to any therapy form first as a patient. So I had been to the hypnotherapy also as a patient, and I could not get into a trance because I could not feel safe enough with the therapist. Right? And that has to do with much deeper rooted templates of how far you trust people. And that in turn is dependent upon early life events. Right? So there are two problems with Freud. First, he used hypnosis for a long time. Then two problems occurred. One, everyone could not be taken into the trance, and therefore the method could not be applied to everybody. And second, in the trance, when he gave suggestions or when he attempted a cure, many times after some time the cure was undone. The cure was not permanent. So these two factors led him to search for another method as an entry to that state, which later on came to be called the unconscious. Okay, what can be another approach to get into the unconscious and make changes there? And he experimented with a lot of things and he finally settled for free association. And once he settled for a free association, he never went back to hypnosis. Uh, in fact, by the time Jung came into his life, that hypnotic phase was completely over. He was firmly anchored in the free association world when Jung came in. In case of, yeah, Freud talks of a cure of a girl who had epileptic fits, and in her analysis, in her hypnosis, she remembered a savage dog chasing her, and that led to high anxiety, and somehow that got connected into an epileptic fit. And those fits went away when this memory was uncovered, the feelings were released, and the analysis made some impact. He gives second example of an employee who was humiliated by his boss in front of everybody. He had hysterical fits, and after the rage was released, the fits went away because the fits were, in a way, a release of the rage. Sir, you are muted.
The second example is understandable, but in the first, the girl, how did the symptoms go away?
Correct.
Because she dreamt of the savage dog coming there, and he had epileptic fit and a drive discharge, and she was cured.
Correct. So you will see in Freud's case analysis, many of these things they will get clarified only when he goes deeper into the Oedipus.
Mhm.
Because what will happen is uh, the problem here is the anxiety getting fixated related to the dog. So we will have to conceptualize here if we take this as a stand-alone case without more facts. without more interpretation, what are we left with? We are left with an incident of anxiety, right? Creating fits, and after analysis, the incident coming to the conscious mind, which was never in conscious mind, it was always in the unconscious. The girl never remembered that incident after the incident happened. So the unconscious becomes conscious, and the anxiety which was trapped is felt fully and released. This is what we are left with. That when the dog chased her, right, she had huge amount of anxiety of death, and that whole memory got repressed. And after analysis of a long time, that memory came up, right, and the effect was felt fully and released, and therefore the cure. Now, when we go to the deeper Oedipal level, we will get into how this is associated with something edible. And there it becomes
Symbolic
more.
dog.
Yeah. So
Who
there it becomes.
symbolizes self?
Sorry, please,
Sorry,
please.
sorry.
Yeah.
Who
So
symbolizes the dog?
correct. Right? And what was the act of the chase?
Yeah.
That act of the pouncing of the savage. So then it acquires a different meaning. So standalone, there is a different meaning. Related to the psychosexual development stage, there is a different meaning. And when you get that connection, it becomes more convincing than a standalone cure. So standalone explanation was this, that the incident loaded with anxiety was fully repressed. After long analysis, it came up in consciousness. The effect was felt fully and released, and therefore the cure. And it would raise a second question, which Freud does not go into. He never went into that. Is what kind of effect will lead to what kind of symptom? Like, can anxiety always lead to epileptic fits? Or is it aggression which leads to it? Or both of them can lead to it? Right? So Freud never went into this aspect of the type of effect and the type of symptom. This correlation he never explored. For him, it was like a universal highway. It was a free for all. Anything can convert into anything. It was like a free canvas. Right?
So there have been many other similar historical cases of Freud which have been mentioned, like Anna Hose, then Little Hans, the Ratman cases. They are very unique in the way the onset and the content of the dream or the free associative state has
Correct.
been the key structure to reach to the unconscious.
Yes, true. And when we read Anna O line by line, we will see how Freud is making his way through a difficult traffic negotiation. So Jung example we saw before. Okay. This brings us to the larger point of the story of the symptoms. And Jung made a very good statement which I am using here. Behind every psychological symptom is a story. As a rule, this story has never been told to anyone. This story is the rock against which the man is shattered. It is our job to find the story behind the symptom and bring it up in analysis for discussion and catharsis. So, case history is like a life story, and the symptom is emerging out of this story. You can imagine the case history as a land and the tree of pathology emerging out of that land. That is the foundation. The life story is the foundation, the land. And from this land, a tree is emerging of trauma. Of course, the tree of health, tree of achievement, everything is out. But we are focusing on the tree of trauma. So, pathogenesis is a clear articulation of relationship between the symptoms and the story. In psychoanalytic terms, I'm talking about, right? That in psychoanalytic terms, pathogenesis means a clear articulation of the relationship between the symptoms and the story. And we are able to make this relationship by applying our theory to the raw material called the case history. We put the case history into the analytic machine of the theory, and on the other side, we get pathogenesis. So upon the raw material of the case history, we apply our theory. And when we do that, the outcome of that is pathogenesis. And the function of that is healing. How we will heal will always be a function of our pathogenesis. How do we believe the problem has occurred in the first place? So hysterical symptoms during an episode, they tell us a story. What cannot be said in reality is said in a coded language of the symptoms. So we are talking of a story, a coded story. What cannot be said aloud. Some people, it's like saying, my life is an open book. Please don't read it aloud. So I am expressing everything to the symptoms, but I will do it in a coded language. So what cannot be said in reality is said in a coded language of the system, of the symptoms, just as in dreams, a coded story of desire is told. In our dreams, we tell our own story of desire in a coded language, so coded that we ourselves can't understand it. It serves a double purpose. Expression is done and a secret is kept. So symptoms do the same thing. Expression is done and secret is kept. So case history revolving only around symptoms and pharmacology without the story of the symptoms is hardly a case history. From a psychoanalytic standpoint, I'm not saying anything in the psychiatric context, it's a different context altogether. But in the psychoanalytic context, right, the story of the symptoms is the core of a case history. The symptoms express the story. Now, how do you connect the symptoms and the story? Now, you can have a simple connection. For example, somebody experiences death of somebody and goes into depression. Very simple, right? So the symptoms can be related to the story very directly. You lose somebody, you go into depression. Symptoms can be associated to the story by action. Carl Jung's example of the psychotic woman doing the stitching action all the time. The symptom is associated to the story by action. Third, symptoms can be associated to the original story by hysterical convulsion. Oedipus complex unresolved and the guidating movement in the hysterical episode, they are very erotic and they tell us some story. So it is the symptom is associated to the desire, to the original traumatic event by a desire. Fourth category, symptoms can be associated to the original traumatic event by meaning. For example, I knew of a faculty member, very sensitive and very good person. He had hysterical deafness. He could not hear certain things. Right? All ENT investigations showed up nothing. And the reason was when he came in as a young boy in the faculty, the, the elder faculty, the senior faculty, they used to abuse him. And those bitter words he could not withstand. He could not leave the job also because financially he was not in a good state. So he had no choice but to be in the job and receive those humiliation every day. So what he developed as a defense mechanism was hysterical deafness. That if I can't hear, I can't be heard. So here the symptom is related to the original story by a purpose, a defensive purpose. Frozen shoulder. The young boy wants to slap the father, also feels guilty. So there is a traffic jam here. Aggression going from one side, guilt coming from the second side, and there is a traffic jam of emotions in the shoulder. In the case of asthma, the Oedipus, the pleasure and the guilt, that you want the Oedipal pleasure and you want to punish yourself for that transgression. Right? The superego is so strong that it tells you you deserve to die for this. And there is a preemptive anxiety action. You better die before he kills you. So this is the kind of symptom story relation. In psoriasis, anger towards the father comes on the skin, and Klein has written a paper on this, the skin as an object of anger. It's a very popular paper, the skin as an object of anger. That you are angry towards X cannot be expressed because of reality, morality. Anger takes a turn, right? And it goes onto your own skin. So here, the symptom is related by affect to the original event. In the original event, anger towards the father. In the symptomatic event, anger towards the skin. The two are related by common affect. Then there can be a more complicated story. For example, a woman has to remove her uterus because of repeated complications. Now she has anger and death wish towards somebody, say her husband, or her father-in-law, or her own father, whatever that be. And she wants to say this story that you are such an important person, you can't save me, you can't stand up for me. People like you should not be born, they should be dead. Not only be dead, they should be born in the first place. So the anger towards the husband or the father goes towards the mother of that person. And the story develops, her uterus should have been removed, so you should not have been born in the first place. That turns back on oneself. And then the desire to destroy one's own uterus. And then the repeated complication for which no medical cause can be found. Nothing in diet, nothing in lifestyle, nothing in the family history. And finally, the uterus has to be removed after multiple complications. Now, here you see a complicated story. The relation of the symptom to the original story is not clear. It's very convoluted. And we really need long-term therapy to unravel this kind of stories. So, this is how they are related. Some symptoms can be linguistically related, like anxiety related to hospital. Hospital can be related to hospitality, hospitality to hotel, and therefore anxiety can shift from hospital to the hotel by a linguistic connection. Or the symptoms may be related to some original element of that system when it happened. For example, somebody was born in the month of June and the mother started working in September, and when he faced abandonment for the first time, rains were coming. So every time clouds gather in the sky, it becomes dark, he starts experiencing anxiety. And if the anxiety is very high, it will create some sickness, and people will say every time this season change, he suffers this problem. So this will be the psychological story behind the sickness of the season change. That the moment clouds come up, you feel anxious, you feel gloomy, you feel sad, you feel abandoned, you experience a kind of longing, you experience a kind of emptiness. And that because when the abandonment event happened, rains had come. So a concomitant, a kind of a simultaneous event got linked to the traumatic event. Right? And then related to that, the affect got transferred. And so now, whenever there are rains, there are clouds, right? You feel the trouble. Freud used this word, condition secondary. This was another word. At those times, the word unconscious was yet to be coined, altered state was yet to be coined. So he used to use different words at different times. This is the state of hysteria. He used to call it the condition secondary. where the conscious mind may be completely overtaken or partially overtaken by the upsurge from the unconscious. And occasionally you can remember the events which are happening, but not the unconscious story. Even if the conscious mind is not fully taken over, still the repression is at work. You can see the effects developing throughout the body, but not the story behind it. So what we see is the traumatic material associates with other traumatic material and goes on to create more complex trauma. And slowly, as the trauma grows, the intensity becomes larger, the frequency becomes higher. And whatever equilibrium is there between healthy states and the hysterical state, that slowly starts tilting more towards the hysterical state. That if you had attack twice a month, after a few years, it is thrice a month. The state develops. So Freud says there is no place in the psyche where the poet has not been before the psychoanalyst. And this raises a very important question, that when we study psychoanalysis, we are into a dilemma. We call it a clinical subject, but it looks like literature. We are not talking of any organ. We are not talking of genes. We are not talking of biochemicals. We are talking of the human felt experience. The magic is, how can this human felt experience, right? Oh, sorry, by mistake I pushed the last button. But anyway, we have to end somewhere. But so the whole idea is, how do you look at this human felt experience and what it can do in terms of healing? So we talked about the two-way traffic, the biochemistry leading to psychological states, and working on the psychological states to change the biochemistry. So the important contribution of Freud was, previously we had only one-way traffic, biochemicals to psychological state. Freud brought in the second-way traffic, that the second-way traffic is also possible. By working on the lived human experience in therapy, one can change the biochemical patterns and templates inside. Uh, should I complete it, or do you want it next time? Can you spare 10-15 minutes? Uh, how is everyone? Comfortable or okay? Okay, let me be narcissistic and decide on basis of everybody. Okay. Now, a few lines on Freud's concept of anxiety, which we'll need later. Uh, Freud had three ideas about anxiety. The first idea was that libido, or life energy as he called, or feelings in normal words, when they are bottled up inside for a long time, they degenerate almost like fermentation, and the release is the vapor of anxiety. This idea he toyed for some time. The degeneration of libido idea of anxiety. Then, as he evolved, he had two ideas about anxiety. And these two ideas he kept till the end. One was anticipatory anxiety, that I have an apprehension that some event will happen which is not in my interest, and I am anxious about it. So it's event occurrence related anticipatory anxiety. And the second form of anxiety is signal anxiety. This is very important. It is like some bottled up emotion is slowly moving towards the conscious mind, and the rest of the system gets frightened. So that creates a layer of anxiety above it. So now both of them are moving together. And this upper layer is making the whole system aware and more vigilant to be prepared that these difficult feelings are coming up. Right? So it is a postman running ahead of the message, right, to prepare the rest of the system for the message. It is a signal anxiety. And this is very important. And usually people outside of the analytic circuit, they don't make use of this concept that anxiety need not be anticipatory only. Right? Anxiety can also be signal. And we see this in ISTDP videotapes that when sadness, anger, or guilt are coming up, it is first covered up by anxiety. Right? And this creates symptoms like blurred vision, cognitive perceptual disturbance, tightening in the head, nauseating feeling, right, looseness of hands and legs, sweat in the palms, coldness in the hands. That is because of the signal anxiety, which is covering up the difficult feelings. Right? So, what we have is two kinds of anxieties, and in both the anxieties, anticipatory and signal, catastrophic thinking is always involved. This is a very important point. Are we doing clinical science or literature? Because when we do Freud, we have this question, and we do Jung, we have a question, are we doing clinical science or mythology? These two questions always are with us. So the movement is the way reality presents itself to us. The movement is from hard science of material to a soft science of human felt experience. And the idea is, if somebody is looking with a fine microscope for years and you cannot find the cause, one cannot go wrong in the small picture. Right? If you are looking at some lifestyle disease for 25 years and cannot find the cause, you cannot go wrong in the small picture. You have to go wrong in the big picture, which is paradigmatic. It will not be a lack of knowledge of details, it will be a difficulty of a different paradigm. So, when we look at the difficulties caused by bottled up emotions, which what we call the hydraulic model, and later on we'll also look at the non-hydraulic model of pathology, that apart from bottled up emotion, what else can cause pathology? We'll come to it when we do what is healing and what is sickness. When we go in details, we'll look at hydraulic model and the non-hydraulic model. So they being the causes of sickness, the paradigm changes. And we go more soft than hard. And we see the human system as far more plastic system, far more driven from the mind than we otherwise believe. Okay, so this almost looks like a kind of magic to some, and some people criticize it by saying, are we doing science or are we doing art or are we doing literature? Are we doing magic? And I always tell them that you never know, in the long run, science may end up proving magic. Okay, just 5 minutes more. We will start from the next time with NAO, Freud's first case. And we'll do it line by line. We'll stop where we have to discuss and make a commentary or discuss our experiences. Khalil Gibran, when he was young, he fell in love with a girl. The name of that girl was Selma. And he made a very famous statement. He said, in every young man's life, there is a Selma. And similarly, in every therapist's life, there is an NAO. The first patient, right, that therapist has seen. So in every therapist's life, there is an NAO. Three cases of Freud are very famous: NAO, Ratman, and the Wolfman. Little Hans also, but we will do these three: NAO, Ratman, and the Wolfman. Now, just a summary of NAO before we go into details next time. This case was 1880 to 1882, 2 years. And Freud, in his own language, describes this. The first phase was incubation, right? From, you can read it, July to December 1880. The second was manifest illness, psychosis, convergent squint, disturbances of vision, paralysis, contractures, uh, difficulty in the neck muscles, contracture of the right hand, uh, psychical trauma, right? All of this came in. So these were the difficulties. Then there was a period of persisting night walking, alternating with more normal state. And this continued till 81. So July 80 to December 81 was a very difficult period. And then we had the decline, and 1882 the relief came. So it's a 2 year psychoanalytic therapy case, NAO, and we'll go in detail again. But I just wanted to give this kind of a preview into what we are going to do. So this is a 2 year case, and Freud divides the whole case into these 4 parts. Okay. So we'll start with NAO, read Freud in original, and discuss it and see how it goes and how slowly the concepts of psychoanalysis emerge. Thank you for staying on. I could complete the content for the day.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Let us stop for the day. Meet next time.
Yeah.
See you then. Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee.